Hey, welcome everybody. So I'm Alta, the communication officer here at Doublethink Lab. So we're going to wait for maybe 1 or 2 minutes and then we can get started. Yeah, I think we can get started since quite a few people have joined already. So yeah, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining this event today. And a special thanks to our speakers for sharing your expert knowledge on PRC influence in different parts of the world. And we are really excited to share the findings with you all, since this is the first time that we can systematically compare PRC influence over time and highlight data points that show where vulnerabilities are deepening and also where societies are proving resilient. And next slide, please. And before we start, just a quick note that this event is being recorded. And to prevent everyone's privacy, the participant list is hidden. And after the panel discussion, we'll open up a Q&A session where you can ask the speakers anything. But also during the event, you can also drop questions in the chat at any time, and then we will do our best to answer them during the Q&A session. And it would be also good if you could mention which speaker you'd like to answer your question. And also, if you want to ask a question anonymously, you feel free to leave the room and join with a different name. So now with that out of the way, we can get started. And I wanted to introduce our first speaker, Minxuan, or as some of you know him, TDCat. He is a Doublethink Lab CEO and co-founder, and through his work, he has focused on mapping PRC influence mechanisms worldwide and also building global civil society networks that some of you are a part of. He has over 15 years of experience in activism, where he has worked on LGBTQ plus causes and environmental and civic tech and digital rights issues. So please welcome TDCat.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. And like Elda mentioned in the introduction, basically, we are so proud. I'm so proud to work with all of our partners together. And instead of saying that we are the one who actually doing the work, but it's actually the network that this fantastic network, China in the World, work with our team, Doublethink Lab, to make this happen. Doublethink Lab and China in the World CITW is starting in 2019. Our main headquarters is based in Taiwan, Taipei, and our goal is to strengthen the democracy through enhancing the digital defense and also try to connect all the stakeholders and experts around the world to study the PRC influence. So China Index is our flagship project out of this network. And we are so proud that we can be able to continue this work since 2022 and be able to systematically compare the PRC influence around the world. And this year, as the data is already out there for, I think, last December, but finally we have the data analysis result in a very nice format in a report, and hopefully everybody can see it and share it and send it out. And be able to use it in your own work. That's something we are really looking forward. 2024, we are be able to do in 101 countries. As you can see here, we still try to focus more on the African region, and also close some, and also for the Pacific Islands, of course. So if you know anyone from these regions, in the map is black, sorry, as a white blank, please do remember that's the place that whether we're still missing the data points. But other than that, we are also looking for continuous work in the future. Yes. So before I start, I want to show you one video especially for some newcomer who just first time or very new to this project, and to explain a little bit about what this is project about and how this methodology work. So it's a very short videos. Let's take a look.
Doublethink Lab and partners in the China in the World Network have set out to build the China Index, the first interactive tool that measures PRC influence all over the world. So how does the China Index work? The index draws together observations of PRC influence from a collaborative network of hundreds of experts in the countries we cover. The China Index is built from 99 indicators. Each one corresponds to a concrete phenomenon of PRC influence that our experts must prove to exist with factual evidence. Here's an example indicator. In my country, journalists, media organizations, or online influencers have attended all expenses paid media tours in the PRC. Indicators are written to capture a particular piece of China's global influence playbook, and together, they provide a comprehensive picture of how the PRC influences foreign countries. If our data collectors want to answer yes to an indicator, they have to prove it with some kind of documentary evidence. So how do we collect the data? We first choose researchers or journalists focused on PRC influence in a given geographical region to be regional partners for the project. Regional partners then recruit local experts from academia, civil society, or media who focus on each index country to respond to the indicators. The job of local experts is to locate documentary evidence, like news articles, legal documents, or interviews that can be used to answer our indicators yes or no. Without documentary evidence, we won't include that into the index. For some indicators, we ask local experts to assess the significance or scale of influence. Let's take an example. When responding to an indicator regarding Confucius Institutes, a local expert in a small country might see Confucius Institutes at 5 major universities and give a score of 4, whereas an expert in a very large country might observe institutes at less than 5 prominent universities and give a score of 1. In this way, experts can give a standardized graded response from 0 to 4 to assess scale and significance. All indicator responses must be reviewed by at least one additional local expert for accuracy. Regional partners then send these responses to Doublethink Lab for integration into the China Index. We normalize these raw scores to determine the world and regional rankings that give you a picture of how China's influence varies across countries. Each year, the index will be renewed to track how PRC influence changes over time. With all our data online, from our raw scores to evidence on thousands of cases of PRC influence, the China Index is your resource to conduct influence research or advocate for more sustainable relations with China. Visit the China Index website today to find out more.
Okay, thank you so much. As the video shows, demonstrate that this is how we work in our methodology. And to dive in a little bit more is that we had a wonderful index committee to work with us. And this year we have Bonnie Glazers, Charles Burden, Glenn Tiffer, Michael Coe, and Michael Mazza. They are working with us to renew the indicators in the 9 different domains. Those domains include media, academic, society, military, economy, law enforcement, to technology, domestic politics, and foreign policy. And yeah, as the video mentioned, we have some grading system. So it's about a half of the indicator that we also ask for the grading. And also for some foreign policy indicator, they have a spatial grading systems. So this is how we produce those indicators. Those indicators are most of the time is referring to the United Framework or referring to the PRC inference strategies or tactics that is commonly observed worldwide. And we have amazing regional partners this time to work with us. Some of them working with us since the beginning in 2021, 2022, and collecting those data together. So we would say this is a more systematically unified methodology for everybody in around the world to document what they see together with the evidence. So we have a lot of the data points to be able to compare the PRC inference country by country. And we go through a long process for do the fact checking and review all this data, and including how we recruited the regional partners and the local expert vetting and everything, and then in the end we do the fact check and complete the website and publish it. And today, after the publish the data on the website, then we start do a lot of the data analysis and combine this report, combine all the experts, regional experts, their observation, their insights together, and put this report out. So it's a very exciting day for us. Finally, we can share this result and insight to you. But before we dive in, I also want to let you know that we have some increased country this year, including some African countries and also some European countries. But at this time, we also have like Israel, Russia joined, which will be also very interesting to see their dynamic. But I want to remind everybody that the data collection was from the 2023 April to 2024 October. So since also changing very fast in our space that China relationship with different countries. So when you read the index, please remind that the data is collected ended by 2004 October. Okay. So this is our top 10 ranking this time, and we have the first three: Pakistan, Cambodia, Singapore. They are the top three before, so it was the same. But their original score, which is their total score, is also going up. We have Nigeria coming in. So basically you can see these are the index top 10 influenced country by the PRC around the world this time. And if we look at the regional shift, then we will see that East and Southeast Asia, they are still dominated and also still very high compared to other region. But the Africa region and also the Central America and the Caribbean region is going very fast. biggest increased region that we see. So yeah, when we start this, yeah, I want to be able to share this like some reflection we have, right? So when we start this project, we want to, of course, we want to check the PRC inference and be able to find a language that people can compare their relationship with PRC in a standardized format. But also we want to see that with all these things happened since 2020, that COVID and more and more human rights abuse that we've been seeing in the Xinjiang is is Turkestan region, and also wolf warrior diplomat that China push out and become today, and of course Hong Kong and everything. So we want to see that whether those influence or cooperation is being more aware by the world, and also whether the influence is going down. But unfortunately, I think, well, unfortunately to us, right? So, it's really there's really a lot of a country is going up, right? So we have, I think, more than 50 countries going up, and why only 24 countries so declines. And especially in the foreign policy and technology, it's continually become the highest ranking domain across the globe. Society also jumped a lot, but we changed the social media indicator from the technology to society, because our committee believe that is more related to the influence to the society rather than technology itself. But still, it's a very strong and it become showing that this is a growing grassroots or digital outreach outside of the China border. And also, like I mentioned before, there's three region is going up a lot, and this is also quite surprisingly giving a lot of consideration for South America, especially. But today, I think we have a good panelist join us, and they might explain a little bit why and also their insight in those regions. And yeah, so right. And other than the domains for those indicators, we also divide those indicators into different layers. That means those indicators are particularly looking at different stuff. Like some indicator is about exposure, which means connection, dependency, benefit, cooperation, and so on. Some indicators relate to pressure, like public threats, sanctions, protests, and other things. And lastly, is about alignment, which is more related to policy adoption, behavior change. For instance, you can imagine a lot of foreign policy related indicator might go to that one, or pressure. And compared to 2022 and 2024, we can confidently say that so far it's only alignment that correlate with the exposure. They are strongly linked together, not with the pressure at all. Basically, the pressure is very weak and getting weaker and weaker tactic for the PRC to use those coercive technique or behavior to try to blend or try to gain more cooperation opportunity or policy alignment. So in the end, I want to mention we want to mention that why this matter and how to use the index, and also encourage all the participants today to be able to navigate this richful resource. So for the government sectors or for policy related, we think they can use the index to review the partnership, spot where reliant on China might be too high, and better understand the risk or the vulnerabilities. And they can also learn from each others, right? So from the neighboring countries, they can see why they have a lower military influence or media influence, and be able to compare their policy or regulatory system. And for the media, we like to encourage you to use the index to report the change with the evidence, show change between 2022, 2024, give context to breaking news, and compare how countries to sectors differ. And for the researcher, of course, we want you to be able to apply the index to compare region, domains, identify the gap in current knowledge, and test the idea with consistent data over time. But also for the researchers, even not with the global ranking or those, those like kind of like quantitative data, but you can also see that as a huge database because we have 99 indicators that have the answers from 100, almost 100 countries around the world. So if you want to see, for instance, like how many countries still have the Confucian Institute or how many countries they have this media corroboration with the PRC, United Front Worker Association, then you can just go into those indicators on our websites. You can find all the countries' answers at one single page. So you can also use that as a huge database for your research. And then lastly, for the last and another list, is for the civil society organization. We want everybody can be able to use. You don't have to be China expert, but then use the index. You can call for the openness and the transparency, raise the public awareness, and protect the community from undue influence. Especially when we know that a lot of those things is targeting the marginalized community or some of those influence stuff is actually matter to grassroots or for normal people's daily life. This is something we would like to work with the civil society, more civil society organization to create this global movement for advocating. Yeah, so those are something we are looking forward and looking ahead. And fortunately, we have secured some of the funding for moving forward, but we do need more. So if you know any funders or any opportunities that could bring this project to going in 2026, then please do reach out. And we also have the plan to make a more accessible material for the general public to understand this research project. So I want to thank for my team and all the panelists to join today and all the regional partner and their local experts to make this project happen. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, TDCAT, for your presentation. Now I'm going to share my screen. Yeah, I hope you can see my presentation. So yeah, again, thank you so much, TDCAT, for your presentation. So now we're going to move on to the panel discussion. And we, as TDCAT mentioned, we wouldn't be able to do this without our excellent regional partners. And we're lucky that 5 of them have joined us here today to discuss PRC influence in the region that they study. So today we have Amanda Stratum, Dr. Bradley Jensen Merck, Hernan Albero, and Soren Inuita, and Sriparna Padik. And I just wanted to give you a quick introduction to understand who they are. So Soren, he is the president at Expert Forum, and he has decades of experience in public sector reform and also regional development across Eastern Europe and the Black Sea region. And then we also have Dr. Sripona Parekh. She is a professor of China Studies at OP Jindal Global University. And her research focuses on the PRC's foreign policy, influence operations in China, and India-China relations. And we also have Amanda Stryden, who leads Code for Africa's Civic Signal Program, which uses AI-driven tools to map and monitor media ecosystems. And then there is Hernan El Barro, an expert in international relations and human rights with more than 20 years of experience in promoting democratic governance. And last but not least, we have Bradley Jensen Merck, provost at Paragon International University in Cambodia. And his work focuses on Southeast Asian international relations and political economy of development and comparative post-communism. So I wanted to start by talking about the big picture. So I wanted to start by talking about the region that is experiencing the most influence or PRC influence according to the China Index, and that is East and Southeast Asia. And I wanted to ask you, Bradley, what to what extent does Beijing's growing diplomatic engagement through ASEAN and bilateral partnerships strengthen its leverage over regional decision-making on security and governance?
Very much, Alda, and thanks to Doublethink Labs, great project, and very happy to be a part of it. Looking here at ASEAN, we can think of it twofold. The first is obviously through the multilateral dimension, through ASEAN institutions, and through Chinese participation in ASEAN forums, things like the ASEAN Regional Forum, and of course, the various consultative dialogues that take place every single year. Oftentimes, people think of ASEAN very much as an economic bloc more than as a political bloc. And that's quite a big misconception. ASEAN's developed the policy of ASEAN centrality, very much trying to stay focused on internal decision-making rather than being pushed to one side in the great power competition between China and the United States. And ASEAN itself, its institutions and its decisions, as we've seen, yes, we do see significant inroads by China for framing, et cetera, and significantly China's role over the last 10 years as it's really expanded its role in the region has been to very much incentivize or to encourage countries to think of alternatives to US-led models. But I think where it's been most effective is at the bilateral level. And it really is a story of division. We now have, with Timor-Leste having joined, we now have 11 ASEAN member states. And China's developed very, very strong relations with 3 in particular. Cambodia, Laos, and of course, Myanmar. Now, Myanmar's role within ASEAN is, of course, distinct right now in light of the coup several years back and its non-full participation. But its relations with Cambodia, which have been very, very close for 10 years, and again, we are second, Cambodia this year on the global list, but also with Laos, which we didn't include this year, but really quite essential to consider as Laos might actually be number 1 globally. In terms of Chinese influence. Now, why is it so important for China to build out those relationships with Cambodia and Laos? For the very simple reason that ASEAN decisions need to be taken fully by consensus. If one member dissents, then that's it, it's over. And we've had serious problems with this in the past. The main issue, of course, for Southeast Asia has been the South China Sea question. And we look back 10, 12 years ago when Southeast Asia ASEAN was attempting to reach consensus on this, and Cambodia vetoed it. Cambodia essentially was acting as China's proxy. Scrolling ahead to 2025 and 2026, we know this is going to come on the agenda next year as the Philippines takes the ASEAN chairmanship. China's in a much stronger position. Its relationship with Cambodia has continued, but Laos, we've seen massively increase its coordination and collaboration with China on questions of foreign policy. So this for ASEAN really creates an enormous challenge. While all countries are committed to the principle of ASEAN centrality, and China, of course, says that it is committed to that, the United States does as well, and all of ASEAN's other partners. But because China's been able to build up these very, very strong asymmetric relations with a couple of members, it's really able to stymie, if it seeks to do so, ASEAN collective decision-making on security issues, economic, et cetera. And this is recognized in the region. This is a significant challenge that's regularly discussed in Track 1.5 and Track 2 fora, and is not something that's going to be going away anytime soon. At the same time, we also see cases like the Philippines, where under the previous government of President Duterte, we saw the Philippines really somewhat, at least be perceived by many, to pivot away from the United States towards China and potentially become another key Chinese ally in ASEAN. That, of course, changed after President Bongbong Marcos took over, but that is demonstrative of just how significant China's actions are across the region and how much they're growing. Let me go ahead and stop there. I know we have a limited time, so thanks very much. Alda, I think you're still muted.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I'm still muted. Sorry. Thank you so much for your answer, Bradley. So, yeah, I wanted to move on to the sub-Saharan African region. So that is one of the fastest, they're experiencing one of the fastest growths in PRC influence of any region. The second, they rank second. And it is the second most influenced region now. So, Amanda, I wanted to ask you from your research, what key trends stand out and which sectors have been affected the most?
Thanks very much, Alan. Thank you for having us. So for this index, what we really saw the biggest increase was in foreign policy, in technology and military, with Nigeria now positioned at 4th on the global scale, and Zimbabwe at 6th, and then South Africa at 10th. The Gambia stood out quite significantly in the growth in foreign policy alignment and media and academia, with like huge jumps in the rankings, with a 62 place boost in the academia domain. So the kind of influence there really is significant, as you've pointed out. But our research really has indicated like China creating this multiple layers of influence strategies across the continent, which we know isn't new or unique and really mirrors like sort of similar socioeconomic soft power systems that Western countries have built. But the rapid change in geopolitics over the last sort of 10 to 12 months has seen China expanding its influence rather than compared to the US and its allies, which have really like reduced their commitments across the continent. So PRC-linked companies have invested heavily in like building digital infrastructure, which in turn then affects media and technology, finance and energy. China is also sub-Saharan Africa's largest trading partner, which accounts for around 60% of Africa's shipments to China and imports. In Nigeria, we've seen PRC-backed companies invest $5.8 billion in a hydropower station, while in South Africa, there have been huge investments in vehicle assembly plants and in outward foreign direct investment flows. Then interestingly, at the start of 2025, the China Communications Construction Company announced that it would be working much closer with Tanzania's media industry to implement what it called the government's strategic 2025 infrastructure projects. So that's definitely one that we're keeping an eye on to see whether there is significant influence within that media sphere. Our research has also indicated that at least 8 countries have signed or procured contracts with PRC-connected entities for smart city systems, which includes worryingly surveillance technology. And then that in turn raises the alarm for the data privacy protections. Chinese state-backed companies also now have ownership stakes in nearly a third of Africa's 231 ports, with 78 facilities across 32 countries, which includes Nigeria, Tanzania, and Namibia. And then lastly to note that I want to add here is that the BRICS bloc, which consists of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, has also in the last 2 years expanded its member and partnership countries to include Egypt, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Uganda. The inclusion of Ethiopia and Nigeria is quite significant as it's the 2 most populous countries on the continent.
Yeah, thank you. And it makes me wonder, given how strong PRC engagement is in sub-Saharan Africa, what kind of policies or civil society strategies can African countries use to strengthen resilience?
So that's a tricky one. I think depending on what your kind of domain expertise is or your domain interest is, there would be different answers to this. So from Code for Africa's side, really, our recommendations lie heavily in the safeguarding and strength of the fourth estate as the kind of backbone of an open society that's grounded in transparency and accountability. And so for influence in general, they would include coordinating at the kind of African Union level or potentially the regional level, regional economic levels to develop joint standards and shared intelligence to track transnational influence operations and financial flows. Another example would be to enact foreign influence registration laws, which require transparency in foreign funded organizations, lobbyists, media to track external attempts at manipulation. But this, like overall, really requires the strengthening of like regulatory environments that supports and develops independent media and implements like a shared information integrity framework that counters foreign information manipulation and interference. So that would include putting in regulations such as mandatory disclosure of foreign media sponsorship, of digital and of digital advertising origins. Sorry. So with these regulations in place, that would in turn support open societies and local agency rather than governments having to do reactionary rules, and in turn keeping a kind of strong fourth estate.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Amanda. So I also in the China index, it shows that Central America and the Caribbean had the sharpest increase in PRC influence. And but the region is actually the second least influenced overall. So Hernan, I wanted to ask you, what does this rapid growth tell us about Beijing's evolving strategy there?
Thank you, Alda, and thank you, Doublethink Lab, for having me and for this great work we all do, we all contribute to. So yes, the Central America and the Caribbean are one of the most the sharpest rise in influence by the PRC. I think it reflects to a certain point the fact that the Beijing is recalibrating its international ambitions and response to external factors. Mainly shifting like global alliances. PRC is putting more effort into winning over the global south, and I think this is clear from what we're listening from everyone. But in this region, the PRC and the index shows there's an engagement across political, diplomatic, and media landscape. Foreign policy, domestic politics, media domains emerged as the most influenced in Central America and the Caribbean in 2024. There has been reinforced efforts to support and build multilateralism in the global south, particularly regarding Latin America and Central America and the Caribbean, specifically with CELAC efforts, BRICS, and of course the Belt and Road Initiative. Via infrastructure investments and foreign aid, like donations, the PRC built a stadium in Costa Rica. The match talked about Chancay Port in Peru, which is not Central America, but it's Latin America, South America. It now seems that the PRC is collecting the fruits of previous economic efforts in the region. So it seems that the PRC, now probably talking about all the region, but even in particular for Central America, is beginning to say, okay, we did our investments, we contributed to the economy in a certain way, many others they didn't, and now we want to have a different position with more soft power effort than hard power or sharp power or however we call it efforts. We can discuss that later, but what I see in the region is that the PRC is sort of abandoning the wolf warriors diplomacy and moving more into soft power efforts. But that probably will take us to the next question.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, and as TDK had mentioned earlier, the data from the index shows that the wolf warrior tactics have not really been working. So Beijing is probably aware of that. So, yeah, I wanted to next just talk a little bit about Sino-India relations, especially because it's been a topic of discussion after the 25th SCO summit in China. And Suparna, I wanted to ask you a little bit about what the data tells us about Sino-Indian relations. So India stands out as the country where PRC influence has significantly declined across multiple domains since 2022. So could you walk us through how Beijing's footprint in India has changed in recent years? And also what lessons other countries can draw from India's approach to limiting Beijing's footprint?
Yeah, thanks, Alda, and thanks to TCAT and Double Think Lab. Very pertinent discussion, and always happy to be a part of it. So, over the last few years, India has actively worked to reduce China's influence across economic, technological investment, and diplomatic domains since the 2020 Galwan Valley clash. And efforts have intensified. They've shown some sorts of mixed results from 2022 onwards. China's overall footprint has declined in areas like direct investments, app ecosystems, because of very stringent policies from India. But India still remains vulnerable in media and academia, where the dependence has persisted or even grown. Um, One arena which is important to watch out for, because geopolitics and geoeconomics are constantly changing, is the subdomain of economics. This is one arena in which India has a dependency on China, just the way it is for most countries of the world. Although India has held ground to ensure China's economic influence remains curtailed. So bilateral trade ties reached about $136.22 billion in 2023, but there's been a massive imbalance which favors China. Despite all of this, the fact still remains that India is not part of the Belt and Road Initiative since the day it was announced. US, Japan, and India were the three countries in the world which have never agreed to the BRI. India does not allow Chinese payment systems. Even Chinese banks can be counted on fingers across the length and breadth of the country. Over and above that, India has very stringent rules on foreign funding, called the Foreign Contribution Regulatory Act, and so on. Chinese investments in India have declined since 2022 because of mandatory government scrutiny for entities from bordering countries, basically targeting China without actually naming it. So approvals have been very rare. They've reduced drastically. They've led to shelved plans like Bide's $1 billion worth of EV facilities, Great Wall monitors, similar proposals, and so on. Quickly coming to how does India hold ground? Because the economy segment is very important to India, India is the fastest growing major economy in the world right now. China wants to benefit from it. What India has done is that it's trying to build domestic economic resilience. There are loads of these schemes, production linked initiative, Make in India, and so on. And in all of this, Taiwan particularly is playing a very important and major role. China tries to arm twist because it's got an export control on materials like gallium, rare earths, and so on. Quickly coming to what could other countries learn? First is swift regulatory actions, implementing targeted restrictions, such as banning off those malicious apps, about 500 which were cheating Indians and engaging in all sorts of legal frauds. Second, incentivizing domestic production. Um, the performance linked initiative, for example, in India has boosted smartphone assembly. Third, diversifying supply chains, collaborations with like minded partners, Taiwan, for example, South Korea, for example, Japan, for example, and balancing security and economics, avoiding full decoupling because it's not really possible at one go. But if the process starts, it's better. One needs to understand that relying too much on China has not been beneficial. India learns from other countries' examples as well as its own. So, in a brief nutshell, this is what it is.
Thank you so much. But I also wanted to hear your thoughts about Modi's recent visit to China. Do you see this as a meaningful shift in India-China relations? Are we going to see India rising up the ranking in the next index? Do you think, or
I sincerely hope not, but here's how most of us Indians see it. There's a widespread and incorrect understanding that this is a thaw in India China relations, ignoring the fact that India has been a very important member of the SCO. Given that geopolitical winds have shifted, irony dies a million deaths when I say this, that India suffers 50% tariffs from a particular country which India saw as a friend, while China stands at 30%. So that geopolitics has completely changed. So, what can India do? Because there are still 1.4 billion Indians who have to be taken care of, and economics is important. Two segments which are going to suffer the most in India's economy because of these tariffs would be textiles and would be gems. India's strengths in pharmaceuticals haven't been touched by the tariffs. India's services haven't been touched. So what do we do in these two sectors? In the SCO, because there's been an expansion, the gems will go to West Asian countries, which is called Middle East in common parlance. Those will go to West Asian countries because they have shown some sort of an appetite for greater consumption. So India needed to be there to talk about it. Second is India also needs to export the textiles. That would be Southeast Asian countries or Central Asian countries. So because of India's own difficult economic situation right now because of tariffs, this had to be done. Over and above that, China, as Arnan was also saying, wants to showcase that it wants to be a leader in the global south. It wants to pally up with like-minded partners. India has bigger credibility in the global south, maybe not as much money as China has. So why not use this situation, which is prevailing right now, to showcase that there's a bonhomie between India and China? Fact here is the armies are still guarding the borders. India is still engaging or investing billions in strengthening the borders. His Holiness the Dalai Lama is still in India. India supports his plans of reincarnation and so on. None of this has changed. India hasn't signed any economic or technological agreement with the PRC. Japan, which has been a long-standing partner, Prime Minister Modi first went to Japan before going to China. I think that was a big signal which the world should have read into. And there are multiple agreements which have been signed with the Japanese government. And all said and done, it's about India's sovereignty. So India cannot really give in to the PRC. So that's my brief intervention.
Yeah, thank you. That was very interesting. And yeah, I wanted to move on to talking about the domains. As Tidikan mentioned, we measure PRC influence in 9 domains. And the technology domain shows the second highest level of PRC influence. And for example, we're seeing more countries authorizing PRC connected firms to supply critical infrastructure. So that indicator increased from 65% in 2022 to almost 80% in 2024. So my question for you, Soren, so what are the security and human rights implications when it comes to PRC tech influence? And I'm particularly interested in hearing your thoughts about this regarding surveillance, data privacy, and freedom of expression.
Yeah, right. Thank you, Alda. So I'm privileged to speak about this fascinating domain, one of the 9 clusters that we have in the report, and this is technology, because indeed is the fastest rate of increase of Chinese influence across the globe. So basically 4 countries out of 5 are on the increase in this domain. So let's start with security. Many countries today rely on Chinese companies like Huawei or ZTE for their 5G networks, for data centers, for even for the smart city projects, or even for wearable devices. And these are, of course, cheaper. They are faster to deploy than Western alternatives. But on the other hand, they create real vulnerabilities. So because if the relations turn sour between the respective country and China, Beijing could in theory disrupt all these systems or use them for cyber espionage. Another security concern is what I call the export of authoritarian technology. Chinese safe city surveillance systems are showing up across Africa, Latin America, as it was mentioned, and Asia, but they come bundled with PRC governance norms as well. So with a soft, if you want, which means heavy monitoring, low transparency, and very weak safeguards. In practice, it means that Beijing is not only exporting technology, they are exporting a digital authoritarian playbook. And this must be understood. And increasingly, these technologies are tied to military partnership as well. In Africa, in Southeast Asia, digital infrastructure projects are overlapping with defense projects with PRC implications. And this effectively embeds PRC systems inside the local command and control structures. Now, let's turn to human rights that you mentioned. First, It means surveillance and privacy. We have concerns about this because PRC linked technologies often enable real-time facial recognition, mass data tracking, and monitoring of online speech. Once in place, they make it far easier for governments to monitor citizens, and it's harder for individuals to protect themselves. Second, there's freedom of expression concerns. Because and this is where the numbers really matter, because by 2024, 65% of the countries reported that PRC-linked firms control or own significant stakes in at least one of the top 5 social media networks or messaging platforms which are used in that society. So imagine that just 2 years ago, the figure was 45%, today is 65%. So there's a massive increase, and think about that TikTok and similar applications are not just entertaining devices. They also shape what people see. They shape their attitudes and what's amplified and what's suppressed in the public conversation. So pro-Beijing narratives tend to rise to the surface in these societies, and the criticism of China is filtered out. And then there's also a chilling effect in the diaspora communities, in the Chinese diaspora communities, because the spread of PRC censorship means that people abroad, students, journalists, and activists, sometimes they hesitate to speak freely. So what's the broader context? Who's most affected? The index our index makes clear that global South is far more affected by this technology infiltration than the global North, on average by 15 percentages. And the reason is obvious, because the Chinese technology is affordable, it's fast, and is attractive to governments in the global South who are pressed to expand the digital access. But the trade-off is very steep, because countries may get cheaper connectivity today, but at the cost of their sovereignty, security, and democratic freedoms. So we have to understand this. This is if I am to sum up, the rise of PRC influence in technology is not just a story about market share or infrastructure contracts. It's about the global spread of governance models. So it's an alternative governance model than what we have known so far. And this creates a risk of dependence, the erosion of privacy, and the narrowing of the freedom of expression. And I'm not really sure we want that in the global North and in the global South. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it is indeed a very worrying trend in development. And that brings me to the foreign policy domain. And that is also a domain that shows a high level of PRC influence. And we are seeing a growing number of governments either supporting or staying silent on PRC's core foreign policy interests, whether on territorial claims, which rose from 70% in 2022 to nearly 80% in 2024, or on Xinjiang, which increased from 61% to 70%. So I wanted to ask you, Bradley, how is Beijing leveraging this growing alignment to shape international norms and debates in multilateral arenas?
Thanks very much, Aldo. There's a few ways. It's really quite interesting. On a certain level, we really have to look at how China perceives these questions. The first step being China views silence as endorsement. If a country is not saying anything, if they can keep countries from objecting, particularly on the Xinjiang issue, then China comes out and says, oh, well, look, there's broad international consensus on these questions. We're not seeing huge numbers of folks opposing, and this is settled. There's nothing that we really need to push for. And of course, Beijing does that by creating its own diplomatic shield, by essentially mobilizing groups, oftentimes non-aligned movement states, many African Union states, states that are part of the Belt and Road Initiative, particularly states that are very dependent upon BRI funding for much-needed infrastructure development. If they're not going to stay silent, or if to move beyond silence and move more in China's court, to actively oppose other resolutions, etc. So Beijing's been very successful in this context, not just here in Southeast Asia, but globally. And we're really seeing, additionally, the question of I think what I've really noticed over the last few years is and particularly here in Southeast Asia as well, has been China's attempt to restructure and redefine those norms of sovereignty and human rights. And often that message is something that is very, very popular among authoritarian regimes, regimes with low Freedom House scores, that don't want to have their own human rights issues brought out for global discussion. Simply framing them away as internal matters is something that shouldn't be discussed, is a framing that's been quite successful. At the same time, and I think we've seen this more and more, particularly again over the last few years since COVID, is Beijing coming out and making arguments of, well, this is simply a Western set of norms. This is part of an old imperialist approach, an old this all comes out of Western colonialism and fundamentally needs to be entirely rejected. If you're accepting this, then you're essentially accepting this Western colonialist, Western imperialist model. And China, of course, is not part of that. And China is a leading member of the global South. We saw that just here about a month and a half ago in Cambodia and Thailand, where Cambodia and Thailand, we've been having rather significant border conflict, which is now in ceasefire. And we saw vice ministers going to Shanghai to meet with the Chinese government as a potential interlocutor, potential mediator. And China's view is essentially use our approach because we don't have anything on our hands. This is all an imperialist problem back from your colonial days. So come to China and follow this new wave of 21st century ultra sovereignty, etc. And it's becoming more and more present. And we have to admit that it's become successful. At the same time, though, I think the one most optimistic aspects to things moving forward is, in practice, the countries that are more likely to be vocal on the China side, there's a quid pro quo in terms of finance, in particular from BRI. As China's funding, though, has slowed much since COVID, and China's ability to really marshal its own economic resources in favor of its particular allies, some promises that were made have not been fulfilled in a lot of places. That becomes harder for Beijing to do. But it is still something that we have to pay significant attention to, particularly in light of the very, very unsettled equilibrium globally that we're in right now. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. And we need to skip some questions because we're running out of time a bit. But I wanted to discuss the society domain a bit because it's the fastest growing areas of influence, driven by grassroots engagement and the popularity of Chinese social media platforms. And one striking example is the surge in Chinese diaspora cultural events linked to the United Front Work Department, or PRC diplomats, which rose from 37.5% of countries in 2022 to 72.3% in 2024. So, Hernan, you mentioned this a bit earlier. I wanted to hear your thoughts about how these events or these grassroots engagements are being used to shape local narratives about the PRC. And possibly, if you want to share, also, are these events and activities influencing local politics?
Thank you, Alda. So how they shape local narratives, or how they sort of impose the PRC narrative, I would say that we need to focus on how they basically organize these events. These events are usually, cultural events. They are placed like, either it's the New Year or other cultural events, where, of course, people from the embassy, mostly the ambassador, usually will come and give a speech, and in their speech, they will try to put forward some of their narratives. They usually wouldn't go into things like Taiwan or, sensitive issues, but they will definitely talk about the great things the PRC is doing, working against poverty all over, against peace all over the world, or in favor of peace, sorry, against war all over the world. And so basically they're trying to portray an image like they are the good ones in the world, and in particular in Central America and Latin America and the Caribbean. I would say that this is key because in our region things are always looked at with the mirror of the US. So it's like, so if you're the good ones, the US are the bad ones, right? So I think that's the way, without mentioning it, without saying it, China is trying to portray themselves in comparative terms to the US, and of course, not only in these events, which happens maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 times a year, but also they have the Confucius Institutes almost, I mean, in most major universities of the whole region, not only Central America and the Caribbean. So, they're there, they are open to a certain way in saying that certain things they won't discuss within these frameworks of Confucius Institutes and so on. And also they take advantage of these events and these cultural instruments to approach not only the general people, the citizenry, but also stakeholders and elites. So they approach to media outlets, they approach to journalists, they approach to the academia, and of course to political leaders. Just to make a quick note of what I'm saying, the PRC promised to invite 900 political leaders to China from the region in the coming years, in the coming 2 or 3 years, and they are fulfilling it. So it's not just a promise; they are doing it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and while we wrap up this panel discussion and before we move on to the Q&A session, I also want to look at lessons from countries that have reduced its reliance on China. So, Soren, many of the countries that your organization tracked have seen a decrease in PRC influence. So what strategies or lessons can other countries draw from their experience?
Yes, so we analyze countries in Europe, and not all of them. The landscape in Europe is more heterogeneous, so the influence has increased in some and decreased in some others. But out of the 5 that we analyzed in my organizations, 2 stand out, and I'm going to speak very briefly about them. One is obviously Ukraine, which is a country where we saw the steepest decline in Chinese influence in the last 2 or 3 years. The drop is almost 13%. And this is spectacular, and probably understandably so, because after the full-scale war that Russia launched in February 22, there's been a backlash also against China in the eyes and the public image of Beijing, in the eyes of the Ukrainian society. The negative views of China have risen above 70%, so it's quite spectacular. Largely because Beijing was perceived, and rightly so, as aligned with Moscow in terms of geopolitics, in terms of technology support. So you can imagine when you have cruise missiles and heavy drones, landing on civilian buildings, killing people, and then the forensic shows that inside there were chips of Chinese origin, that's not exactly the best PR for Beijing. So the decline of China's image in the eyes of the Ukrainian society is very obvious. There's also a collapse of investments, because before of this escalation of Russia war aggression, there were investment in agriculture, technology. They were speaking about smart cities, like in many parts of the globe. They were planning transportation connections, the metro in Kiev. Everything is put on stop, so nothing happens, and there's even media and political disengagement, because China was seen with a very limited presence in the peace efforts, in spite of pretending to be a great power, and this is not exactly so. The lesson from Ukraine is that popular sentiment matters. Public opinion can override sometimes the economic considerations and geopolitical context. Once economic and political channels collapsed, alignment disappears as well. The other country is Italy. So very briefly, we learn a different story here. The decline is also in Chinese influence is also significant, more than 8%. But this reflects political and public pushback against Chinese engagement. There's been withdrawal from the BRE of Italy a few years ago, signaling reduced willingness to rely on such investments. And there's greater scrutiny of Chinese investment in sensitive sectors, technology, infrastructure, and there's a shift in the public opinion in Italy. So skepticism toward Beijing has grown, and this is making harder for local elites, actually, in Italy to justify closer involvement, although there are still strong connections in academia, in the media, at the elite level. But, the public sentiment is against, and so the lesson here is a strong institutional and political debate can really act as a check on the influence of big authoritarian power. Italy teaches us that careful policy choices can also limit the vulnerabilities. And I will stop here, although we can explore, also the countries in Europe where the influence has increased as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think this kind of this answers a bit the last question, where how can which strategies can realistically reduce or limit influence if there is a strong alignment between the political elite and the PRC. Or Bradley, did you want to add something to that?
Sure, just a couple of items. I think on the broadly speaking, the playbook's actually relatively straightforward. The first is independent institutions and civil society. I mean, so no huge change here. The more you get investigative journalism, the more that you have grassroots NGOs, the more that you have academic freedom, the more you're going to find folks who are going to be shedding a light on these problems and these relationships, and they are able to facilitate change to some degree, or at least to mitigate some of the worst effects that we see from in these areas. Second is Beijing's economic relationships, especially here in Southeast Asia, always tend to shift towards large-scale firms, government-tied, and so on and so forth. Supporting and recognizing that these are oftentimes one-sided. They're not necessarily win-win for everyone. And particularly for smaller firms that are not state connected. But to do that, it means supporting economic diversification. And for countries that do have very elite-driven economies that don't have that, it's absolutely essential, not just to build that up within a country, but also to expand out the options that countries have for investment in particular. China never is anyone's great export market, as we've seen during the Trump trade disputes. But China always or overwhelmingly becomes the leading investor. And this becomes the main point that is made often and consistently. If we don't get the funding from China, where are we going to get it from for large infrastructure, et cetera? And if we don't see multilateral options, if we don't see significant bilateral funding mechanisms from other states, then a lot of elites simply are going to come and say, well, this is our only option. This is our only game in town. So if you can't match us, well, that's all we're going to go with. So making sure that those are available becomes absolutely essential. Finally, regional integration and being able to basically see that there are alternatives beyond China. Here in Southeast Asia, that's much easier because of the enormous frequency of ASEAN integration, of ASEAN engagement across everything. But having those and being able to look at alternatives to what China is offering you becomes incredibly important.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, thank you so much. And thank you so much to all of our panel speakers. Yeah, this has been a fascinating discussion, and I'm sure that our participants have lots of questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, you can press the hand button, raise your hand button, or you can type your question in the chat. So, and it would also be good if you could mention which speaker you would like to answer your question. Do we have any questions? Oh, yep. Arms free? Yes. Feel free to ask your question. Arms free, Ajana Ku. Yeah, you're muted now.
Director of Grassroots Center for Rights and Civic Orientation. I want to thank you very much for this treasure trove of data and information on China influence. And being from Nigeria, I can see clearly how the data actually speaks to what is actually happening in Nigeria. And so my question goes to Amanda, because you mentioned about the economy, looking at the issue of debt, the fact that Nigeria's debt, domestic and international debt, is currently on the upward surge right now, which is also an issue that people are talking about domestically, that the Nigerian elite, they spend a lot of these monies they collect on, not on projects that actually impact the people. So how much does this data tell us in terms of the debt, the issue of debt, and how we can raise more questions around that, at the level of civil society? Thank you.
Sure. That doesn't quite cover what we've got in the index. So I'm a little bit floored by the question. I don't know if anyone else of the panelists have something to add to that. Sorry.
So I was just saying that in terms of the domain of economy, when you look at the case study of Nigeria, whether the issue of debt, Nigeria's indebtedness to China, really came out strong in the data. I'm still going to read the report, but I was just trying to see what sense you make of how much debt has been used as leverage by China to gain much of the influence in Nigeria, seeing that Nigeria actually rose so much in this last report. Thank you.
So I think it's very much structured around two different things. So some of it is around loans. So yes, very much around debt. Some of it is done in a way of partnerships. So it's a shared kind of infrastructure or shared creation. So one of that would be the example that I used of the power plant that's being built. Overall, like, to be perfectly honest, I don't think we dug too deeply into the kind of cause behind Nigeria's debt, but it is very much and between 2022 and 2024, there certainly wasn't as big a change in terms of the what the index showed us, but it is very much something that we are kind of continuously looking at, and yeah, it certainly is a factor, but I can't say that it's a something that would have changed on the actual index at the time.
Thank you. So I think we can move on to the next question. So I can see that Ernest Mutsenki, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. You raised your hand.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yes, I think you pronounced it correctly. Thank you for that.
Okay, good.
My question is directed at Jensen. I think he was speaking to issues pertaining to Central America, and I think he pointed issues that are relevant to some of us in civil society. Maybe my question is in relation to the elites, and in particular to civil society. To what extent has President Donald Trump as foreign policy also helped in helping to increase Chinese influence? I heard you speaking about elites saying we have no more options, and talking about options, you are looking at reduced funding, the ceasing of operations of US aid, and so on and so forth. So to what extent would you say that the current American foreign policy has actually helped in raising PRC influence in that particular region, and more so in relation to the work of civil society?
Thank you. I can definitely begin by saying it's certainly not helped at all. What we've seen essentially, and I can really only speak for my region that I research here in Southeast Asia. But when we see things removed, obviously U.S. aid, the U.S. aid closure is particularly problematic, and the timing is particularly horrific in terms of looking at what China is doing in its own aid policy. So let me look at this in detail. China is here in the region. We don't see them doing as much massive, large-scale infrastructure as before. Rather, we've started to see China pivot towards more small-scale projects, things like health, education. These are now on the table. These cost less. But historically, this has more been the purview of U.S. aid or our colleagues from Japan, the European Union, and so on and so forth. So just as Washington is exiting the space where it usually has some of the strongest, if not the strongest, contributions, China's entering it, and that is, to my view, ceding the field, and is not a smart choice, and gives China significantly more leverage. At the same time, the issue of the just general uncertainty that's been created by the current administration on the future of U.S. participation, even things like the Asian Development Bank, which people are now talking about, is not wonderful. China does thrive, I mean, on being able to essentially substitute its own institutions for existing consensus-based institutions, regional institutions, global institutions, etc. And if we see continued American withdrawal, then we will inevitably see a shift more towards Beijing on purely practical levels from folks that are coming out of government ministries, et cetera, that are looking at, well, this is again, as I said before, the only option, the only game in town. On a positive note, the one thing that I think is notable here is that we have to differentiate, I think, between China before COVID and China after COVID on aid policy, and the money is simply not, the unlimited flow of cash is over. And that is, I think, the biggest impediment for China today. It's trying desperately to hide it as much as it can. But every country that has a high level of dependence on whether it's export, it's Chinese investment, whether it's Chinese tourists, whether it's Chinese whatever, has noticed that, well, this is not the good old days, and the commitment that China made over so many years, that this is just going to continue in perpetuity. Well, it stopped during COVID. It hasn't come back. So that is essentially a positive for putting some degree of a brake on this. But the administration's approach, and I do understand it, but I think it's not taken a remotely serious perspective on the scale of the challenge and the implications that this is going to have and are already having immediately.
Yeah, thank you. Do we have any further questions? Yeah, feel free to just jump in or raise your hand. Okay, I still have some questions that I would love to ask some of you. So I'm just gonna go ahead and talk about yeah, I didn't get a chance to ask you this question, Amanda, because well, one of the indicators that we measure in the foreign policy domain is humanitarian assistance. And it's not uncommon for countries in sub-Saharan Africa to receive donations from the PRC. So could you elaborate how this contributes or fits into the PRC's broader global influence strategy?
Sure, thank you for the question. So similar to, I think, Western humanitarian aid, PRC would use this as soft power and to strengthen bilateral ties. But what we see is that PRC is usually, aid rather, is usually framed as non-political and as entirely unconditional. The aid is also always done in partnership with the ruling or the host government, as opposed to necessarily trying to filter it in via alternative sources, depending on kind of what the aid is, where the aid is required. It's also very generally offered very publicly. So we'd see articles, we'd see big kind of handovers of this taking place to create that grassroots like community support. And because of that, the lower accountability, it can also, well, rather, because of like lower accountability, to having to report on everything, there's a rollout that's much more rapid than it would be necessarily from an alternative kind of organization or another organization. And one example we have of this is an interview we did with the newsroom a few years ago, where one editor said to us, when they needed equipment, so not quite aid, but aid to run their news organization, was when they needed equipment to run their newsroom. The Chinese embassy had them delivered in a few days. They literally had to sort of knock on their door and say, we need 10 laptops. The laptops were delivered with no kind of clear what the payback for that would be. Whereas when they were working with other aid organizations, it was very much required applications, it required reporting and accountability for what was done with the equipment. We've also seen that we also see it described as like solidarity or friendships, and we saw this appearing during the 2019 cyclones in Mozambique, for instance. In South Sudan, most recently, we're seeing food aid being delivered in one of the counties, which is framed neutrally as a friendship and solidarity with the people. But the food itself or the aid itself is delivered to South Sudanese government officials to distribute. So while it's painted as sort of unconditional and open and as friendly as such, it really is so. The aid aligns with China's diplomatic priorities, which could include alignment with like preferred policies or leadership models. It always secures market access or ensures support on like contentious issues. So like really simply put, the humanitarian aid is very neutral in language and about friendship and about solidarity, but it's very political in practice, which very much lines up with what their global strategy is.
Exactly. And we're also seeing in sub-Saharan Africa, I think every country in sub-Saharan Africa, if we look at their top domains, all of them have foreign policy there. So it goes kind of hand in hand. So so Ronald, sorry, you raised your hand. Do you have a question? Ronald, do you have a question?
Sorry about that. Yes, my name is Ronald. I'm from Uganda, and I'm a journalist. My question, I think, will go to Sorin, and possibly Amanda could chip in as well. And it's the bit about the technology domain, which interested me a lot. And when he was sharing insights on digital authoritarianism being exported from PRC, I think I get a sense of this happening in my country, where we've had recent investments. Not recent, because investments in digital infrastructure has been going on, I think, with the last decade, investing in things like cameras on the streets and stuff like that to apparently fight crime and terrorism. But actually, sometimes when we look at high-profile murders happening and targeting individuals, you don't get a sense that we are getting benefits from this technology. But anyhow, my question then would be, sorry, and I don't know whether this is quite an unfair question, but do you get a sense that some of our governments really understand what they are doing, or they are just in for the short-term gains, which really is maybe protecting their power and stuff like that? Do you get a sense that our governments in sub-Saharan Africa understand what's really going on with their hobnobbing with the PRC in this particular context? Especially, let me just add quickly, when you hear that there could be times when friendships are not going to be forever, and they could just choose to run away or sabotage what they've established. Thank you.
Should I try to answer now, Alda? Okay.
Yes.
Obviously,
ahead.
I'm not. I have no experience in sub-Saharan Africa, but from what we know, in other parts of the world, it can be a combination of both. It depends very much on the nature of the political regime and the competitiveness of the political scene at home. So, if you have a relatively clean government who tries to do better and to expand the digital penetration in the country, then there might be naivety. And we've seen it in Europe as well, especially at the local level, municipalities or regions who were approached by Chinese operators or by Chinese provinces, state operators from China to implement these surveillance schemes in order to increase security for everybody and the rest. And they didn't realize those technologies could be used for spying or for spying on the Chinese diaspora. This happened in my city, which is Bucharest. They were starting, actually, they were trying to plug in an area of Bucharest where the Chinese diaspora lives, and this for obvious reasons. But I think that most of the time you have relatively, I wouldn't say authoritarian regimes, but hybrid regimes. You know what the trend today is over the world with democracy backsliding, and in particular, I mean, on many continents, on sub-Saharan Africa, you have these regimes which are increasingly authoritarian, and once they have this technology under their control, it is very tempting for them to use it against the opposition. I mean, let's be serious. I mean, why wouldn't they do that? Because there are no democratic safeguards, and if the democracy if is backsliding, and you give them a shelf or an off-the-shelf solution, cheap, and with Chinese advisors to implement it, of course they will start to use it against troublemakers like civic activists like yourself or like myself, or against investigative media, before using it, very honestly, for public security, for, on the street. So we have to be very cautious, and it depends very much on the nature of the regime.
Yeah, thank you, Soren. Amanda, did you want to elaborate on that or add something?
No, I think that sums it up perfectly.
Yeah. Okay, so the time's almost up, but I do think we have time for one more question. I can see that Carlos Nazareno, yeah, you raised your hand. Carlos,
Hello.
please ask your question. Hi. Good to see you again.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Being mainland China-based companies, could the heavy use of Zoom and TikTok in certain countries be a possible metric in the China index under technology influence, for influence operations or cybersecurity risks? What are your thoughts on these technology platforms? This is for anyone.
Very quickly, if I can intervene, we already use it for the index, but also beyond the index. I'm working in monitoring elections in Eastern Europe, and the high penetration of TikTok, we see it as a risk factor, actually. And we see actually political consequences of people being hooked actually to this propaganda, which is used, I mean, the platform is used very skillfully by Kremlin and the Kremlin-related propaganda in our part of the world.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Anyone else wants to add something to that, or?
If I could just quickly comment.
Yeah.
So India had banned TikTok, I think, way before the other parts of the world started taking cognizance, precisely because of the reason that there's a lot of propaganda video which comes along with it. And given the fact that it's actively used for gray zone warfare, and given the fact that the Indian Army and the Chinese PLA are still at the borders holding ground, TikTok was being actively used to create certain perceptions and to reduce the faith which normal citizens had in the Indian Army. Given all of these reasons, given that it was seen that it was a malicious form of a technology, it got banned. I guess it's more or less the same. Even in Nepal, 2 days ago, while all other sorts of platforms were banned by the government, including Facebook and YouTube and so on. Somehow, TikTok stayed on. That also shows the linkage which the ruling elite has with regards to technology transfers from China and so on. So it's a difficult technological. It's not purely a technological tool. It's much more than that, and it's used for active dissemination of propaganda. And I guess that's the reason why during calculating the indices for various countries, Doublethink Lab uses technology and apps as a very important determinant.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, unfortunately, we have ran out of time. But thank you all so much for attending today, and especially thank you to our speakers. This has been a fascinating discussion, and thank you so much. And so yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or interview requests, or you need access to more data, or want to reach out to collaborate with us on something. So yeah, thank you all so much. And yeah, see you later. Bye bye.
Bye. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for coming.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Congratulations, Elda. Then we can get it down.
Yes, I'm so glad it's done and it went well. They are the best.
Yeah, so proud of you.
Thank you, thank you. I am I mean it was only a good event because they were quite good. So
Yeah.
I am we picked the
But I think the panel operation is quite good as well. I think the panel we framed the panel under QA format. I think it's really interesting.
yeah, I think it's actually a lot better than presentations because it's
Yeah,
more
yeah.
dynamic.
Agree.
Yeah, and we can also control what they say.
Okay.
Although not control, but the direction.
Well done.
Okay. It looks like boss
See you.
is
Okay.
okay.
Be
Okay,
proud
see
of
you tomorrow.
yourself.
Yes. Okay. Bye.
Bye.